Well, what?
That's as loud as you could crack it. It's just a noisy racket.
That's the sleepy sign.
All right, welcome back to the Radical Parenting Podcast. My name is Tony Shawcross.
Hey, everybody. I'm Kara Porbaugh.
In past episodes, we've talked about mostly parenting books, reviewing parenting books, which we're going to continue to do. Kara and I have some awesome books on our reading list. I just started one I'm so excited about, but that's for another episode. Today, we're going to talk about fear-based parenting, and most of the resources we'll be pointing to are blogs and podcasts like this one that we also love listening to. And for me, the topic today on fear-based parenting started while I was on a road trip with a girlfriend. We were going to Moab to go mountain biking, and she played this podcast from NPR called "How to Become Batman." So it's 5 years old, from Invisibilia. And so yeah, she and I were on the way to go mountain biking, and this whole thing is about our expectations and how our expectations from studies of like lab rats to children to it really focuses mostly on actually blind children and vision impaired children, how our expectations of them changed their performance. It was a fascinating podcast. And then, there's just so many more resources around fear-based parenting. So we're going to get into a whole bunch else. But I want to share one kind of interesting little story about this mountain biking trip. It was on my mind the whole time we were out there. And this woman who I was dating, her name's Leah Teeters. She was a much better mountain biker than I was. She mountain biked a lot, and so it was super fun to go out with her into Moab. But as we would do like these really challenging sections of mountain biking, me being a guy who's kind of like accident prone and not really afraid of getting injured, I was just way overconfident in my abilities, and I would try everything. And fall and hurt myself frequently. But there were so many obstacles and stuff that I did that she didn't. And I just think, it all kind of related back to this expectations thing. I mean, if people were watching, people might have thought I was a better mountain biker than her because there were so many things I was going up and down that she was walking her bike down. And I think it just, had so much to do with people's expectations of me, my expectations of myself, society's expectation of women and girls versus society's expectation of men and boys. So I've been just thinking about this podcast ever since, and I was really psyched Kara did it with me. And then Kara brought forth, and we came up with a whole bunch more resources around fear-based parenting that we're going to share with you. So what did you think about the podcast? It started out with the kind of rat experiment showing that rats do better based on our expectations of them because of these subtle ways that we handle them differently and talk to them differently and increase or decrease their anxiety, or contribute to their anxiety or not. And then it goes into this Daniel Kish. Is that what we just said his name was?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So a blind a kid whose parents really let him figure things out himself. And he did this echolocation thing where he would, walking through the woods or riding his bike even, make a clicking sound with his mouth. And a lot of you guys might have seen other people too, that he's not the only blind person to do this, but he would echolocate. And they said that like, depending on people's skill with that, they can really see, because all our sight is just like rearranging light waves into mental representations of the outside world. And he's doing the exact same thing with his mouth and ears. He's representing other electrical stimuli and recreating in his brain an image of the outside world. And some studies have said that your accuracy with echolocation for humans can be anywhere from like something the size of a watermelon, if you've really like trained it, to something the size of like a Volkswagen, even for like an untrained person using echolocation. So they're saying that blindness kind of isn't real. They can still see. They're either considered really nearsighted because they can only see things they can touch with their fingers, and then they do again invent a mental picture that's just not from the visual sense but from the touch sense, to echolocation where they can see farther but only very badly, only with the definition of something the size of a Volkswagen. So it's really fascinating.
Fascinated that whole research about that the visual cortex actually is lighting up when a person's doing this echolocation stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was mind blowing. And so those mental images are occurring even though it's being produced in a different way. Really fascinating. And I really was surprised to hear that at some point in the podcast, they said a lot of children who become blind do it automatically. They sort of naturally tend to develop this echolocation and doing the clicking, but that for so many
squeaks or squeals or
yeah, and so that it's just kind of something that evolves naturally, and that it's been discouraged a lot because it's whatever, socially kind of inappropriate or weird or something. And so that was pretty fascinating to hear about this kid who just really learned to get his way around all these dangers and obstacles and occasionally get hurt. All children get hurt sometimes. And that's how different it was when he met another boy in school who was also blind, but who had been to a school for the blind, where he was always being led around by someone and had things brought to him. And that really actually reminded me of radical honesty for some reason, where it's like by spoon feeding people and protecting, when we think that we're protecting people, sometimes we're actually hurting them. We're taking something away from them. He talks about that parents are often just interrupting the child just a split second before they are about to hear that they're at the edge of the road and stop or whatever, and robbing them of that edge where they're learning about their environment.
Yeah. And Karen and I have talked in the past about how often when we protect our children from danger, it isn't even actually the danger or injury that the kids are about to sustain. It's our discomfort with seeing them feel anything, or it's our own discomfort we're rescuing ourselves from. And I think I loved that example that you said he gave. Daniel wasn't going to let this child walk into the street either, neither was this child's parent, but Daniel would have waited quite a bit longer, and they're both going to be tense, they're both going to be awkward, and they're both going to be watching with on pins and needles. But he wants to give this child every chance they can to figure this out for themselves. And I think as we are protecting our kids from danger, I would encourage myself and everybody to just think is this just me unwilling to be nervous and uncomfortable and anxious, or is there danger here? And what can I do to protect my child from danger? Go ahead.
And I've had a little bit of experience with this. It's not, I don't think, to the same degree. And, my kiddo is a climber, and she always has been, and she's been very physical and agile, for most of her life. And she loves to climb on stuff. And it's like a continuum of finding the limit, right? Like I have a deck out on the front of my house where the back side of it is probably 20 feet above the ground. So that's a limit for me. I'm not going to let her climb on that like a balance beam 20 feet above the ground. She would, I actually believe that she would probably be able to do that without any problem. But when she was a kid, she would constantly climb on the back of the couch. On there was a firm part that's really skinny, And she would just go up there and walk and maybe have a finger on the window or the wall next to her. And she's like 1.5, 2 years old doing this, right? And any other adult comes over and it's like, ah. And maybe I was like that the first time too. But then I saw her ability, that she was actually safe doing that she was completely in her balance and in her control. And so, I mean, she must have done that for a couple years, just constantly climbing up to high places, balancing on stuff, doing all kinds of things that make adults go like, ah. And she was fine. She actually rarely hurts herself. She's very agile and like, I don't know, I can't really take credit for it. And I also want to be like, oh, like maybe I did a good job because I really let her do a lot of physical stuff where she got to learn like how her body moves. And yeah.
When I was a kid, I was just so fearless, and I would get injured fairly frequently. And I remember my mom telling a story of when I was like 6 or 7, and I was in the hospital for like my 3rd or 4th set of stitches by that point, which is a lot for like a 6 or 7-year-old. And I had gotten them ice skating, and I'd gotten them from falling on the desk in preschool, and I'd gotten several stitches specifically in my chin and in my elbows and in my hands, and my mom came in all like scared and worried, like, oh, he had gotten hurt at school or at a friend's house. I think this one was at the Osborne's house, playing in their frozen lake in their backyard. And she said, I just said like, it's fine, Mom. This is like my 3rd time and it'll be totally normal in a week. And she said she didn't feel reassured at all. She felt like, oh, F, like this kid is not taking like these ramifications of his rambunctiousness as like as a cue that he should kind of calm down. I was like covered in blood, and I was just like, it's no big deal. This has happened 3 times, and in a week I'll be back to normal and I'll be able to go right back out on that lake and whatever. So, yeah, so I mean, I'm definitely a proponent of the kind of non-fear-based parenting, and like all parents, I'd be devastated if my kid, got cut or had to have stitches or something like that. But I also just love this story, and I encourage you guys to listen to it. The link will be down below, and there's just a whole rabbit holes full of places we can go, and we'll talk you through some of the rabbit holes that we pursued going through that. And like a lot of our stories, this is kind of grounded, and we'll keep talking about vision impaired kids, blind kids. But this is most useful. We'll be talking soon with Laura Turley about autism, and like so many of the great resources there, they aren't just useful for blind kids. They aren't just useful for autistic kids. These are lessons that are awesome for all kids. So, well, let's finish talking about how to become Batman, the Invisibilia episode from 2015. Then we'll go into some more of the rabbit holes. So
there's one more thing I want to say about it. About the Batman podcast is they mentioned it very briefly at the beginning, but I never heard about that research about the rats being, performing so differently just based on the researchers' expectations. But I had heard about, there's been, I think, quite a bit of research done on education. Like if a teacher gets a class that is labeled as, a slower class or something like that, a lower intelligence class, or they get a class that's labeled as the gifted class, those students can be randomly assigned to one of those labels and then perform very, very differently because of the teacher's label in their mind and their expectations. And it's not like a telepathy thing. I like how they said in Invisibilia, it's not like energetic or something that my expectation affects the person I'm interacting with. It's my expectations translate into these tiny behavior changes they could be tone of voice, eye contact, the way that you, the resources that you get. Every little behavior choice, right? So it's not some mysterious thing at all. It's like it's really observable, the way that our expectations change the way we interact with people.
Yeah.
namely our
Yeah, and a common theme for every book we're reading, everything we're doing in this Radical Parenting podcast, everything has this common theme of like respect for your children and like treating your children like the humans that they are and the adults that they are becoming, and just like a high level of respect and honor for our kids. And that's what this is about too. It's just like honoring their abilities. I've done a lot of work locally for Montessori schools here in Denver. We did some for Montessori school in Evergreen, Colorado, and then one called Family Star, which is one of my favorite nonprofit organizations. We serve hundreds every year, and that one is just like you had said with it wasn't free range kids, it was the aware parenting or simplicity parenting, or no, hand in hand
parenting.
Yeah, hand in hand. You had said like, this is maybe something I want to do with my life.
Yeah,
I had that same moment with Family Star Montessori. I was just like, the impact of the work these people are doing on the world is just so huge. Like, if this isn't what I'm going to keep doing, if I'm not going to keep doing my thing here at Open Media for the rest of my life, this is a pretty cool calling also.
Mr. Tony, Montessori teacher.
Yeah. So there I helped them make a bunch of videos that are just about the care that it takes to set up your space to make sure your kid can just truly roam free. Mm-hmm. And what Kara was just saying too about Elsie Jane, it also reminds me, like, it takes a lot of diligent attention or a very safe space to like let your kid do this without any risk to them. I don't want us to be proposing that our kids can just run out into the street and whatever. They need to be watched for, but it's the less they know about that, the better. And they pick up on these very subtle cues. So the more we can like really have that trust, the better too. And I think it's totally fine to say like, there are times when I'm willing to watch you and make sure that you aren't going to hurt yourself. And then, yeah, there are times where I'm not going to let you climb on that thing because I just don't want to be on edge, like watching to make sure you're not falling. Which is one of Kara's struggles sometimes.
Yeah. And, Janet Lansbury talks about having a yes space where, it's totally designed to be safe so that, kids have this experience a lot of, going to grandma's house or going to a restaurant or a public place where, they can't necessarily touch every single thing they want to touch and do stuff with it and climb on everything they want to climb on. And they're being asked to restrain their impulses a lot. And they need a space to go where there is nothing they can't do. There is nothing that is not available for exploration.
Yeah. So we want to point out a few podcasts. So this is just one episode. Invisibilia usually isn't about this, but there are a lot of podcasts that are and blogs that are just like 100% about this, about fear-based parenting and the opposite, which is what we're promoting. So we've spoken at length about Janet Lansbury. Kara's been a huge fan of her podcast and her materials for years, and I'm so grateful she turned me on to
her
Janet.
Podcast is called Unruffled, and her blog is called Respectful Parenting.
Good. So we'll put links to that in down below. And then you also mentioned, you can talk about any of these, Susan Stiffelman, Hand in Hand, Aware, Simplicity.
Yeah.
Anything you want to say about any of those?
Well, I want to say I love Susan Stiffelman, and her book is Parenting Without Power Struggles. She has a brand new podcast that she just started a few months ago, I think. And I love Kim John Payne, his Simplicity Parent. I actually didn't make it through the book. Sorry, Kim John Payne. I'm going to go back and read it again now because I love his podcast. And now that I can hear his voice, I think I can get through the book now. And then, and I don't know that I would put them so much in this. I'm not sure that they talk a lot about fear-based parenting, but they do have this respectful way of treating children as whole humans who have a lot of agency and ability. And then one that I would like to mention is, I haven't read her book yet, but I heard a talk by this woman and was loving her work. Her name is Julie Lithcott-Hames. She wrote a book called How to Raise an Adult, Break Fear of the Overparenting Trap. So she was I want to say admissions director or something like that at Stanford. And she was working with all of these really high achieving kids coming into college for the first time. She worked with college freshmen. And she said, she talked about that she became really concerned about these kids who she felt like had been sort of shoved into success by their parents. And one of her images was like, these parents had done so much for their children that it was like these children had been like helicoptered to a top of the mountain and then dropped off and like, okay, here you go, you're at Stanford. And they did not know what to do with themselves. I remember one of the things in her talk was she read a list from the book of 20 things that your child needs to know how to do before they go off to college. And stuff like they need to be able to get around on their own. They need to be able to ride the subway and know how to get places, right? They need to know how to be able to do laundry, stuff like this, that she was seeing that college freshmen at Stanford were not comfortable doing. Really basic life stuff. And so I think that comes into play here, where when we do too much and when we're constantly afraid that our child is going to fail somehow, and we're sort of stepping in and saving them, that we're taking something away actually by not letting them fend for themselves and go through their own learning process and all that.
And this takes concentration. This is why, to me, this is such an important topic to talk about, because if there are a few of these things that when I've listened to some of these books on tape or when I've read some of these books, I've thought this goes against my nature, the praise thing, for example, which has nothing to do with this topic. But good parents think their job is to do this stuff for their kids. They're being so selfless. They're providing like you're supposed to. They're self-sacrificing and paving the way for their child and all this stuff that we think good parents are supposed to do. And in reality, it really hinders your child. And we all want to give our kids all the advantages that they can. And it's counterintuitive to think that the way that we can give our children this kind of leg up, although not supposed to be, it's not a competition, but the way that we can give our children, every opportunity in the world often is by not doing this stuff for them, by not paving the road for them.
Yeah.
So I think that's an awesome resource. And I was mentioning that with Montessori kids, these are 4-year-old kids, 3-year-old kids that are making their own food and washing their dishes afterwards, and just doing stuff that you would never expect kids to do.
Yes.
So
my daughter does that at her school. They have these little choppers that they'll chop the vegetables, and everybody, washes their own dish and their cloth napkin after snack and stuff like that. It's not even so much about teaching responsibility or something like that. It's they want to do stuff in the world. Kids want to do real stuff. They don't want the toy. They want the real deal. Right. Yeah. So cooking in the kitchen. And I will say, I actually don't often cook with my daughter because I'm usually too hungry to be patient at that moment. But when we're able to do that, it's she's 5 now. So she gets more and more skilled, obviously, but it's really slow. If you want to make muffins or whatever with your child, it takes twice as long. Right. And there's spills and there's eggs on. And I imagine it's worth it in the long run that instead of doing everything for her, it can be to actually let her make mistakes and crack an egg and it goes on the floor or whatever. And that's if I have to choose when it comes to food, I have to choose my moments personally where we have the time and I have the patience to do that. And it's she really loves to do the real thing.
Totally.
You know, that she's up there next to the hot stove stirring the scrambled eggs or whatever, you know, and it's like she got burned the other day and it happened. And now she doesn't touch the hot pan by accident,
Yeah.
you know.
And what she has to give you in that process is such a more like valuable lesson than what you have to teach her about how to crack an egg and stuff. Like what she has to teach you is like, in her book, it's not worth it in the long run. It's worth it like right now. Like it's worth it. It's worth it because this experience of messing up and cooking a brownie badly and burning something or whatever, that is that. Yeah, I mean, we are all so focused on like just getting this thing done and what's next and whatever. And like our kids, if we let them give us that gift, aren't focused on that. It's just like, yeah, this is awesome. This is awesome. This isn't about having a muffin or me becoming a better cook. This is just about it, what it is.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Cool. So we're going to put links to all these down below. So Julie Lithcott-Hames, you mentioned Susan Siffelman. Anything you want to say about hand-in-hand parenting?
You know, I just got turned on to hand-in-hand in parenting. So hand-in-hand parenting. So I don't know what I want. So far, what I'm gathering is that you know, it's very in tune with Gestalt psychology, which is what radical honesty is based on, which is going toward the dilemma or the intensity or whatever. So it's like, it's all about, you know, wherever it's right in line with all of these modalities that we've talked about. It's like, it's not our job to like try and change, like improve them somehow. It's about coming alongside next to them and being with them in whatever's happening. You know, I'm not explaining this very well. I'll get back to you. Let's do a whole thing on hand-in-hand parenting.
Okay.
We'll learn more about it.
I'll mention too that Kara and I both did a training this past weekend on something called the Wheel of Consent. And it's not really relevant to what we're talking about, but at the end, there was this conversation about whether we're doing what we're doing to fill some gap in our own self-worth. And like, one of the cool things I've seen about Brad that I've never seen from any other therapist is he won't answer your questions. He will keep you stuck in a place of discomfort more than anybody I've ever known, you know, like he knows the answer, and he won't tell you. And so often when I'm in a situation as a therapist, I mean, I'm not a therapist, I'm a coach, sorry, and a certified radical honesty trainer. And when I'm helping someone in my weekly meetup or in set one-on-one sessions, if they need something and I know the answer, I'm just like, I want to give it to them so bad. And it's like, it's not just out of me wanting to help them. It is out of me wanting to be seen as smart and wise and wanting to, yeah, it is some kind of ego thing. And I see that actually in most of the trainers and therapists that I know. And it's so much more valuable. I just heard a coaching call recently where one of our coach therapists was trying to get feedback on some work. And to me, like, again, the answer was so obvious, but they just didn't say it. And it's just so much more powerful when people can figure out these answers for themselves.
Through direct experience instead of through the mind, because it's a different pathway.
And same with parenting. I mean, like, so many parents, their entire self-worth comes from this idea of being like a good parent and providing for their kid. And yeah, I just felt like that those two, that dynamic comes to play a lot with kids. And your kid asks you a question, like whatever, and you want to be like this parent who knows the answer or who can do this for them, or like they're struggling with their shoelaces and you can do it so quick or something.
Mm-hmm.
but it's just so much more valuable to just let them struggle and let them figure that stuff out for themselves, and know that check in with yourself. Like, am I doing this truly as a contribution to this person, or am I doing this for any way that's about me?
Yeah. And I think that taps into our biggest fear as parents. Well, I don't know. I mean, I think our biggest fear, of course, we have concerns for our child's safety and well-being, purely for their own benefit. And we also have this big fear about, am I doing it right? What if somebody looks at me funny? And how is my kid going to be seen by other people, and how am I going to be seen? And all these fears about, is my child going to turn out okay and be okay in the world?
Yeah. Yeah. So, and that really touches on this thing that we'll probably close with today, although we've still got another 30 minutes or more, is this article that we ran across in Psychology Today called The Many Shades of Fear-Based Parenting. It's by Peter Gray, PhD. And so we're going to go through some of these ideas of fear-based parenting versus what they call trustful parenting. We later learned that Peter had started this organization called Let Grow, which I think is also mentioned in the Invisibilia podcast. And one of the co-founders is this woman, Lenore Skenazy. I don't know how to say her last name, that founded the book and blog Free Range Kids, which we'll also make sure is linked in the bottom. And Let Grow just has a bunch of resources for parents that want to, give what we're talking about, this trust-based parenting, the kind of opposite of fear-based parenting, opportunities to their kid. And you can say Peter Gray is one of the co-founders of that organization. Definitely the philosophy of this group is just so aligned with what we're talking about. We might end up doing a whole article just about that. In 2008, she had a column called Why I Let My 9-Year-Old Ride the Subway Alone. So referencing back to what Kara was just talking about. So a lot of these resources talk about helicopter parenting, which we all know what that is, just kind of like watching your kid so closely that they can't do anything. I think of my sister Emily as one of the best parents around. But yeah, her kids, she does a lot for her kids, and her kids don't do as much, especially her youngest doesn't do as much for himself, especially. And that helps too when he has an older sister that's such a good girl that he's got two people just kind of doing everything for him. And if people will do that for you, you'll take it. Like the blind kid that Daniel was talking about in the podcast, you'll take it. Sure. Thanks. Thanks for not making me wipe my own butt or walk and just be carried everywhere. We'll all take that if people will give it to us, but it doesn't serve us. And so they talk about not just helicopter parenting, but the snowplow parenting, where it's just removing all obstacles for your child. Kind of like the Stanford thing that Kara was just talking about. You've plowed the way to get into Stanford, but then life has obstacles. Life has things that we need to get over and get around, and you don't teach your kids how to do that for themselves by doing that. And you wanted to talk a little bit about fuel injector parenting and tiger parenting, didn't you?
Yeah. And before we even do that, I would love to just read a little bit of the opening of this blog from Peter Gray. I think it's so
I'll go up there with you.
Okay. So he writes, this is his blog, The Many Shades of Fear-Based Parenting. He says, I've long been advocating on this blog and elsewhere for what I refer to as trustful parenting. Trustful parents allow their children as much freedom as reasonably possible to make their own decisions. They trust their children's instincts, judgments, and ability to learn from mistakes. Trustful parents do not try to guide their children's development. They trust their children to guide their own development. And I want to insert that this has also to do in the early years with walking and potty learning and all of that, where we actually don't have to do anything as parents. Kids learn how to walk by themselves. They learn how to use the potty by themselves. There's not that much required from us. Trustful parenting is the most natural and least stressful form of parenting. Hallelujah. For both parent and child. Ethnologists have found this style of parenting to be universal in hunter-gatherer cultures. I really like the article that he links to here, and I want to talk about that too in a moment. Trustful parents are not afraid of life, and they are not irrationally afraid for their children's lives. Trustful parents have faith in their children's capacities, and that faith becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. As I wrote nearly 10 years ago, Trustful Parenting sends the following messages to children. You are competent. You have eyes and a brain and can figure things out. You know your abilities and limitations. Through your self-directed play and exploration, you will learn what you need to know. Your needs are valued, your opinions count, you are responsible for your own mistakes and can be trusted to learn from them. Social life is not the pitting of will against will, but the helping of one another so all can have what they need and most desire. We are with you, not against you. I add now these additional messages. Your life is yours, not mine, and life is to be enjoyed.
Awesome.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we like, that reminds me of Brad and of Radical Honesty so much, of like, we're here, we're alive. You know, let's not spend all of our time stopping ourselves and being afraid and teaching our children to stop themselves and be afraid.
Yeah. And it's so hard. I mean, we are programmed for fear. And when your fear-based brain is in a battle with your trust-based brain, the fear-based brain wins. You know, there are a lot of studies that just say when your amygdala and your HPA axis are like active, your decisions will be made based on that. Your lizard brain makes that decision. And it's so much faster than your prefrontal cortex and your frontal lobe and your logic and your ration. It's so much faster that then all your prefrontal cortex is doing is finding rationalization to explain that decision. You don't use this part of your brain to make these decisions. You only use it to provide rationalization and logic that justifies this decision that was already made. And there have been a lot of, you know, this is an advancement in brain science just in the last like 20 years or so, but there's a lot of just understanding that your hypothalamus and pituitary glands and amygdala and your lizard brain makes these decisions faster than your prefrontal cortex can even get involved. And we think we're making them rationally, but what's really happening is we're applying ration to a knee-jerk lizard brain decision after the fact. So my point is that it takes work. We're programmed to be fearful, and parents are programmed to be fearful with their kids, and it's natural. And a lot of natural things are really good for us. You know, they're evolved out of billions of years of universal wisdom. But this is one of those things that we're realizing isn't that good. And so we have this knee-jerk reaction and pre-programming for fear. And those who have gone through trauma or experienced some real loss in their life have that much more strongly than others. And we have to, I mean, we don't have to, but there's benefit for our children if we interrupt that and say like, no, this is the part of the brain I'm going to be using. I'm going to calm down. I'm going to like think through what are the long-term ramifications of this for my child, not just what's happening right now, but yeah, and what can I do that'll be best for them in the long run. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. I want to give a plug right there for polyvagal theory, where, you know, if we can get good at knowing what stage or what state our autonomic nervous system is in, you know, then we can, you know, be able to move back and forth more freely and get out of those like, you know, activated fear states and get back to calm, connected, social states.
And we might one day talk about like Deb Dana or Porges, or one of the people that work specifically in that. But the next book that I'm really excited about doing with Kara, which will actually be a few weeks from now, not next week, is this book called The Yes Brain, which also gets into polyvagal theory. And this whole idea of the yes brain is this part of your brain, this like the part of your brain that can have connection and trust and morality and all of that. Whereas the no brain and the fear brain really is, just steers the ship more than any of us know, and has ramifications that it's going to be good to bring to light. So future book, The Yes Brain. But for now, let's go back to this podcast and this topic, and specifically this Psychology Today article that Kara was just reading from Peter Gray. So thanks for reading that intro. Do you want us to also say anything about fuel injector parenting, or what they called tiger parenting?
Yeah, I was interested in that, what he called fuel injector parenting. And he says, I just made up that term, it's the best I can think of. But I really related to it, identified with that. He talks about fuel injector parents are not so concerned with removing barriers for their children, like doing stuff for their children, as they are with injecting their children with what they regard as the sorts of motives and attitudes that they perceive as necessary to navigate this frightening world. And he talks a lot about competition, and this reminds me of another Alfie Kohn book, not the one that we reviewed a couple weeks ago, but the one I read before that, called The Myth of the Spoiled Child. And it's this idea that, we have to sort of inject these certain qualities into our children so that they can be successful or win or be competitive or whatever, things like determination and hard work and grit and blah, blah, blah. And all these things.
Ambition.
Right. And I have a little story that I want to tell, actually. So, and this fuel injector thing, I do think it comes from a place of fear, because we are afraid that our kid is not already complete and whole without us injecting something in there. We think, they can't do it without this. We have to teach them how to be successful somehow, which is just
they're so lazy.
Premise.
They're so
right?
lazy.
Yeah.
They just sit there and drink milk.
Automatically going to be lazy and irresponsible and whatever. And Alfie Kohn, I loved what he said about this whole the whole determination thing. He's like, what is the value there to keep doing something that you dislike over and over and over again, just to say that you stuck with it? Why do we even value that? Why not go off and do something else that you're more interested in and perhaps have more ability in and whatever? So he kind of demystifies this whole thing about, but it's whatever we want to teach our kids, responsibility or all these, values. So I had a moment with my daughter where it was on Halloween, and we were riding our bikes around a neighborhood that I don't know the neighborhood. We were with friends of ours, and it was getting to be quite a long bike ride, and we weren't back to our, cars yet. And the kids were getting tired. It was getting dark. We were on a busier road than I would have really liked to be on. So my fear brain was sort of like, we need to get out of this traffic and back to, safety and warmth and dinner and everything. And so I'm starting to feel a little activated or whatever. And my daughter started to we were going up a really big hill, and we were all walking our bikes up this hill. And my daughter was kind of starting to melt down, right? She was tired, it was cold. We were ready to go home, but we weren't home yet. And I noticed that I had this knee-jerk reaction. My just conditioned reflex was to say something like, thank God, in a moment of grace, I didn't actually say any of this. But what was about to come out was you can do it, and like your legs are really strong, and just keep working hard, and like sometimes you just got to suck it up and like keep going or something like that, right? And I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying any of that. And I just knew that none of that was going to have any impact on her. I was like, yeah, I get it. Like, you're cold, you're tired. We're going up this big hill. We don't know where our car is, you know. And I said and I was so proud of myself because I don't often do this actually, but I sort of like reached into my little toolbox, was like, what else can I say? Like that, where I'm not trying to teach her a lesson. Like, she didn't sign up for my lecture, right? She's just like trying to get up this hill. She doesn't want to hear a lecture about, you know, hard work and determination. And I reached into my little toolbox and I thought of that how to talk so kids will listen thing that I love, which is granting wishes in fantasy. And I was like, yeah, this is a really big hill. And what we need is like a magical little hot air balloon that folds up in a tiny little box and goes right in your basket. And then when we get tired, cold and tired, it just pops out and gives us a hot air balloon ride, like up to the top of the hill. Like, wouldn't that be amazing? We need to create that. And she's kind of looked at me funny and then like sort of started to giggle. And then we just walked up the hill, right? And I don't know why I thought of that story, but there was something about, you know, we don't have to suffer so much, you know, in situations like that. And we don't have to teach our kids to like suffer, you know, like, well, you just got to keep going and like keep putting one foot in front of the other and stick to it. And that's how you're going to succeed in life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Of course. Yeah. No, I like the story and I appreciate you for sharing it. I also think on this topic of like ambition, which is what they're talking about with the fuel injector or tiger parents, you know, like I don't want to always go back to Montessori, but it is one of the few things I know well. You know, just letting the kids do their own exercises. These kids get like engrossed in them when they get to follow their own folly. That's where, when they're not doing things for your praise or because it's what everybody's supposed to do or because it's what a good kid does, the intrinsic motivation that comes out of following their folly is so much more powerful than any other source of like ambition. And for me, ambition isn't the goal and achievement isn't the goal. But if it was, the key is still not to say you can do this. Like, when you stick with it, you're going to see how good it feels when we're up at the top. And you know, like it doesn't work. Like, what works is helping your child find the stuff they love doing and just letting them do it. And I'll just share a personal story. You know, when I was in school, I was a really smart kid. And so for me, part of the like goal of school, because I knew you were supposed to get good grades and you're supposed to whatever, was just to do the minimum I could do to like excel and just like, you know, be at or near the top of the class, still be in AP classes and honors classes, but like do nothing, you know? And even in college, that was it. And I picked a lot of my classes based on this like book that they had at CU Boulder where you could see how easy each class was. The students gave ratings to the teachers and how easy the classes. And I just picked the easy stuff. And then I got kind of my dream job out of college, working for a big firm that's now Oracle. Doing great stuff. I got to give cars away, and it was like marketing what I thought I wanted to do with my life, which is still kind of what I do: marketing, communications, PR, advertising, now exclusively for nonprofits. But you know, I had this great job, and then in 2000, tech, there was a big tech crunch. I got laid off my job. And I was like, I gotta get back on. I'm 401k. I'm about to buy a house. I wanted to buy a new car. I got to get back into it. And I don't know what happened that had me just take a step back and just say like, let's figure this out. Let's make sure this is really what you want to do. I had an awesome safety net because I got severance from getting laid off because the whole division got shut down. We got great severance packages. And I was like, there's unemployment too. If I need to go on unemployment for a while, I could do that. I don't need to live in this super nice townhome that I'm in. I could live somewhere else if I wanted to. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was a little scared of not having a house and a 401k and all that stuff. But I just decided to just focus on what I wanted to do every day. I had never really painted, so I tried painting for a while. I sucked at painting, did like 20 or 30 paintings. I really focused on my music, wrote some of the best songs I've still ever written. 20 years since then, I still haven't written as good a songs as I was writing back then. I volunteered for media orgs and started working more with friends that were doing pro bono advertising work, what I'd been doing before for what is now Oracle, but doing it for like nonprofits and Montessori schools and stuff like that. And got to a place where I was just really doing exactly what I loved doing every day with no ambition, no goals to start my own business, no focus on making money, no focus on being an executive director or whatever. And that turned out to be the most ambitious, I started a multi-million-dollar nonprofit organization. I started a television station and ran 4 different TV stations. I now run 2 different radio stations, have this awesome facility and anywhere between 10 and 20 employees reporting to me, and created some great, programming, helped thousands of people make their own media, all this stuff. So lots of really great stuff that if that was my goal, or if my dad was telling me like, you gotta get there and you could have lots of employees or whatever, any of those things, none of that interested me. What interested me was making art that shaped the world into the kind of place I wanted it to be, and being around people who were also lit up to be doing what they wanted to be doing, and starting an organization that just all we're about is self-actualization for ourselves and for everybody that we're touching. So again, the point is kind of back to what you're saying. It's we don't need to learn ambition and drive. We just need to learn what it feels like to do stuff that lights us up. And then that ambition and drive just happens.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing all that, Tony. I really love that story. I mean, it reminds me of the life planning work that's in Practicing Radical Honesty, and reminds me of, there's a teacher here in Asheville named Alea, who's an awakened person who's just lives in West Asheville with her family, and she teaches satsang and stuff, and she always talks about, grace and true nature and the unmoved mover, that there is a life force energy that when we stop resisting and blocking and controlling, that we can do without doing, right? That there's all this creative energy that will unleash when we open to what is our true nature. And it's this whole thing about ambition and determination and responsibility and all that is based on a false premise that there's something flawed about us that we have to fight against or suppress or whatever. And that's what we're doing with our children. A lot of times is thinking, well, I have to mold them and shape them and inject them with values and all this. And that means that we're coming from a place of thinking that they are flawed and that they have to somehow be trained into successful people. Yeah,
good. So we have so many references we've talked about that are right on this theme and topic. So this is again going to be a rabbit hole for you guys, but we're going to link to a few different blogs, a few different books, a few different podcasts that we'd love for you guys to follow. And of course, feel free to let us know if there's anything that we've been missing, and we'll check it out as well. Anything else you want to say before we wrap up today's episode, Kara?
I would love to say, let's see, we're almost out of time. I would love to say a little bit about Peter Gray's, another one of his blogs that he links to from the first one, and it's called Play Makes Us Human. number 6, hunter-gatherers, playful parenting. And he kind of talks about this whole other paradigm, right? Which is, I have not read the continuum concept, but I think it's a lot related to that book, which is also a big inspiration for radical parenting, Brad Blanton's book. And I want to read a tiny bit of this. He says, to give you a sense of hunter-gatherers parenting philosophy, here is a sample of quotations from anthropologists and others who have lived in various hunter-gatherer societies and observed them closely. Hunter-gatherers do not give orders to their children. For example, no adult announces bedtime. At night, children remain around adults until they feel tired and fall asleep. Paracana adults do not interfere with their children's lives. They never beat, scold, or behave aggressively with them, nor do they offer praise or keep track of their development. The idea that this is my child or your child does not exist among the Yacana of South America. Deciding what another person should do, no matter what his age, is outside the Yacana vocabulary of behaviors. There's great interest in what everyone does, but no impulse to influence, let alone coerce anyone. The child's will is his motive force.
Awesome.
It's so beautiful, right? And of course, I mean, we live in a different society than a hunter-gatherer society. And, but this idea that there's a different way is so beautiful. And I want to read the very last thing that he writes in the very last paragraph. Why did the approach to parenting change with the advent of agriculture? It wasn't just that new metaphors became available. Rather, the goal of parenting changed from that of fostering the child's will to that of suppressing the child's will because of the perceived needs of society. And that really struck me, right? Like, that's a pretty big deal. So when we're parenting, I want to check for myself, is my motive to foster my child's will or to suppress my child's will? And I wish I could find this next essay that he's referring to read more about that. And it's so interesting to think our whole paradigm is based on molding and fixing and shaping our children. And there's a possibility of a completely different way.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you. I hadn't read that. I hadn't gone down that link. But Brad even talks about this in Radical Parenting. He talks about like kids will sleep when they sleep. They'll eat when they're hungry. They're whatever. And you know, there are a lot of studies that say kids work really good with structure, but then there are a lot of people that say a lot of times that structure is really for us, not for them. And they work well with it too, but it's really for us. And you know, we have to have jobs. A lot of people don't have time to just like pay close attention to their kids and be fulfilling their needs. But go ahead.
Yeah. And well, what I think it is, you know, being in single family households, especially, you know, in my household or your household, there's one adult and there's one child. So there is no way to watch your child all the time, right? Yeah. So we can't do things. So in hunter-gatherer societies, you know, I think it was not about watching the children. It was about a bunch of adults being together and a bunch of children being together. Yeah. And things work a lot differently when that's happening. So like at my house, there is a bedtime. And yes, it is for me because, you know, it's like I've given everything I have to give and I'm done, you know, at 8:00 or whatever. And we have a really gentle and sweet routine, and it's not a big battle or anything. And, you know, if I was with other adults and she was with other children, that might not be necessary. In our little bubble, you know, like a nuclear family bubble, I do need that. I need a couple hours by myself at the end of the day, you know?
I loved the part too where he said, deciding what another person should do, no matter what his age, is outside of the Yacana vocabulary of behaviors. There's great interest in what everyone does, but no impulse to influence, let alone coerce anyone. I mean, why I've started this blog and why I've studied what I've studied is my life is about reliance. It's about that last episode that we did. It's about like trusting everyone to be their own guide and to follow their own decisions, and knowing how. It's also the prime directive of Star Trek, non-interference. It's just like, no matter how well-intentioned our manipulation of others is, it often just seems to turn out worse than if you just let people be their own, guide and follow their own direction. So, I love that you read those excerpts from Peter Gray, and I think that's a good place for us to stop. We'll be back in another week or two with another episode of a Radical Parenting Podcast.
All right. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.